A millionaire was at the supermarket buying sweets for his 7-year-old daughter when he heard a child crying in the checkout line. His daughter pointed and said, "Daddy, look, she looks just like me." When he turned to see the poor girl holding a carton of milk without enough money to pay, his heart almost stopped. She was a perfect copy of his daughter, and what happens next leaves everyone shocked. Richard Caldwell saw the world through a golden lens, but his eyes carried the shadow of an old loss. A widower at 35, the successful entrepreneur lived for his 7-year-old daughter Sophia. She was the sun that brightened his days, the living memory of his beloved wife Clara, who had been taken from him so suddenly just after giving birth. The protection he lavished on Sophia bordered on obsession. A wall built against any pain that might threaten the only link he had left to true happiness. His emotional vulnerability, a subterranean river, would surface whenever memories of Clara emerged, reminding him of the guilt that gnawed at him for not having saved her, of the paralyzing fear of losing his little girl too. That afternoon, the gourmet market they were in felt like an oasis of opulence, its aisles brimming with color and flavor. Richard pushed the shopping cart, already overflowing with artisanal sweets for Sophia's delight. She had just come from her private school, her Crestwood Academy uniform pristine and her backpack adorned with sparkling keychains. As they headed for the checkout line, an almost inaudible sound, a soft whimper blended with the soft ambient piano music. Richard, accustomed to the elegant hum of the place, tried to ignore it. But a pang in his chest, that natural compassion Clara had always praised in him, made his eyes search for the source of the lament. Sophia, noticing the change in her father's expression, tugged on the sleeve of his linen blazer, her curious eyes pointing to the next aisle. "Daddy, look at that girl. She looks like me," she whispered, with the innocence of her age. Richard managed a fleeting smile that didn't reach his eyes, thinking of his daughter's vivid imagination. He leaned down, planting a kiss on Sophia's silky hair as his gaze sought out the girl she mentioned. What he saw, however, wiped the smile from his face completely. She was a child of the same age as Sophia, perhaps a little thinner, dressed in simple worn clothes that contrasted sharply with the surrounding luxury. She was holding a carton of milk, her small fingers fumbling with a few coins on the counter, her eyes glistening with unshed tears that threatened to spill down her pale face. The silent desperation of the scene squeezed Richard's heart, awakening memories of his own pain and the overwhelming desire to protect the vulnerable. It was the kind of image Richard, in his bubble of comfort, rarely encountered, and it struck him with unexpected force, like a bolt from the blue. The little girl, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, turned slowly, ready to return the milk carton to the shelf as her few coins were not enough. And that's when Richard's universe came to a standstill. His eyes locked on the child's face, and the shock was so intense that the box of imported cookies he was holding slipped from his grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. There before him was an exact copy of Sophia. The same large almond-shaped eyes, the same delicate nose, the same curve of the lips. The identical facial structure he knew so well. It wasn't a casual resemblance, it was a mirror, an almost supernatural reflection of his own daughter. His heart hammered, a whirlwind of unanswered questions spinning in his mind as the girl continued to walk away, oblivious to the earthquake she had just caused in his world. He had to do something, but his body felt paralyzed, trapped between reason and the vertigo of an impossibility made real right before him. The shattered box of cookies lay on the floor, but Richard barely noticed. His gaze was fixed on the girl who, head down and shoulders slumped, was turning to put the milk back. Those eyes, that face. It was as if a mirage had materialized in the middle of the aisle. A wave of heat and cold washed over him, mixing disbelief with a primal need to act. The sight of helpless innocence, combined with the overwhelming likeness, tore through the veil of his usual reserve. He couldn't just let her go. He couldn't ignore that silent plea, on an impulse that surprised even himself. Without thinking about the implications or the strangeness of the situation, Richard took a step forward, nearly running towards her. "Wait!" His voice, a little hoarse, cut through the market's murmur. The girl stopped, turning slowly, her eyes wide with surprise and, perhaps, a little fear. She looked like a startled fawn, ready to bolt. Richard knelt, trying to match her height so as not to seem so imposing. Sophia, beside him, watched everything with childlike curiosity, oblivious to the gravity of the moment. "You don't have to put it back," Richard said, his voice softer now, reaching out to take the milk carton from her slightly trembling hands. "I'll get that for you. Not just this one, but another one too, if you'd like." The simple offer, coming from a stranger, seemed to confuse her even more. Her eyes, identical to Sophia's, fixed on his, searching for an answer to this unexpected gesture. A spark of hope, mixed with distrust, lit up in them. "Really?" she asked, her voice a thread of a whisper, almost inaudible, but full of a fragility that struck Richard to his core. Richard smiled, a genuine smile he hadn't shown in a long time. "Yes, of course, come on. Let's go to the register." He took her small hand, which was surprisingly cold, and led her. At the checkout, as the 2 cartons of milk were scanned, the girl never took her eyes off him. The moment the purchase was complete, something unexpected happened. With a spontaneity that completely disarmed Richard, she threw herself into his arms, a tight and unexpected hug, full of pure and profound gratitude. The scent of cheap soap and the frailty of her small body enveloped him, awakening paternal feelings he never thought he'd feel for any child other than Sophia. It was a brief hug, but it resonated in his soul, touching a place he thought had long been dormant. "Thank you, mister," she said, and her eyes, now dry, shone with a light that was almost identical to his own daughter's. In the days that followed, the image of the girl wouldn't leave Richard's mind. That hug, the unsettling resemblance, it all tangled together in a web of thoughts that kept him from concentrating on his work. He tried to rationalize it, attributing the coincidence to Sophia's imagination or an optical illusion brought on by the pain of remembering Clara. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The following Tuesday arrived, and Richard went to pick up Sophia from school, as he did every day. The sun bathed the courtyard of the private institution, where children ran and laughed under the watchful eyes of parents and staff. He parked his luxury sedan and got out, his eyes scanning for his daughter's small silhouette. And then, there they were, chatting animatedly near the exit gate, their heads bent together in conspiracy. Sophia and her, the same girl from the market, now without the worn-out clothes, but in simple yet clean attire. The two looked like a single image, multiplied, a perfect reflection. Richard's heart leaped. He watched for a moment, the two of them laughing at what seemed to be a private joke. As he approached, Mrs. Peterson, the school's administrator, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, turned to him. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted him, her voice cheerful. "So glad you're here. Your daughters were just chatting. I didn't know you had another daughter. They're identical, aren't they?" Her words, spoken with the utmost normalcy, struck Richard like lightning. "Your daughters. 2 of them." The air seemed to thin in his lungs, and the world spun. He tried to form a response, but the words caught in his throat as a cold terror began to settle in his chest, announcing that this might not be a mere coincidence after all. Mrs. Peterson's phrase echoed in Richard's mind like a dissonant bell. "Your daughters. I didn't know you had another daughter. They're identical, aren't they?" He tried to hide the tremor that ran through him, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Mrs. Peterson, you know how kids are, and resemblances. Sometimes they can be startling, can't they?" he stammered, feeling his face flush. The administrator, not sensing the storm brewing inside him, simply laughed, agreed, and moved on to greet another parent. Richard, on the other hand, felt the ground vanish from beneath his feet. This was no longer a coincidence or an optical illusion. The confirmation from a third party, someone completely uninvolved, was a direct blow to his attempts to rationalize the inexplicable. He approached the two girls, who upon seeing him broke into identical smiles. Sophia ran to him, hugging his legs. The other girl, a bit shyer, simply took a step back, her eyes shining. "Daddy, this is Anna," Sophia exclaimed, full of enthusiasm, pointing to her new friend. "She's in our class, did you know? And she's so nice." Richard swallowed hard. Anna. The name, simple and common, was a stark contrast to the complexity her existence brought into his life. He knelt, hugging Sophia, and glanced at Anna, a look that mixed curiosity, fear, and a pang of something he couldn't quite identify. "Hello, Anna," he managed to say, his voice still a bit choked up. "It's a pleasure to formally meet you." Anna smiled shyly, a smile that was once again the mirror image of Sophia's. "Hi, mister. Thanks again for the milk." The sincere gratitude in her voice, the purity in her eyes, disarmed any shred of skepticism that might have remained in Richard. He found himself caught in a web of mystery and emotion, where logic seemed to have no place. Mrs. Peterson's words, Sophia's words, Anna's very image, it all fit into a puzzle he had no idea how to solve. In the car, on the way home, an unusual silence hung over them. Richard drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind racing. Sophia, in the back seat, seemed lost in her own thoughts. He considered asking about Anna, about how they met at school, but the words just wouldn't come out. He was afraid of what he might hear, afraid that the truth, if there was one, would be even more disturbing than his wildest fantasies. It was Sophia who broke the silence, her voice childlike and innocent, but it reverberated in the car like thunder. "Daddy, she's my sister." Richard nearly slammed on the brakes. "What, Sophia? Where did you get that idea?" he asked, trying to sound calm, but panic was already creeping into his chest. "I remember her, Daddy. I remember when we were in Mommy's tummy. She's my sister. I just know it." Sophia's words, spoken with unshakable certainty, hit Richard like a physical blow. He laughed, a humorless sound, trying to downplay it. "Oh, Sophia, that's silly. You must have dreamed it, sweetie. You two just look a lot alike, that's all. It's a big coincidence." He tried to keep his voice steady, but inside, the terror was growing. The conviction in his daughter's voice, the way she spoke, not like a child making up a story, but like someone sharing a memory. It planted a terrifying seed of doubt, a seed that, he sensed, would grow into a nightmare if it wasn't uprooted soon. If it wasn't a dream, if it was real, what did it mean? And how could he, who prided himself on protecting Sophia, have failed so terribly in his past? The image of Clara, his wife, flashed in his mind, accompanied by an overwhelming sense of guilt. The mystery of Anna was just beginning to unfold, and Richard knew he would have no peace until he uncovered every one of its secrets. The seed of doubt planted by Sophia's words began to sprout, quickly growing into a thorny bush of uncertainty and fear in Richard's heart. He tried to push the thoughts away, but the image of the two identical girls overshadowed everything. The guilt of not having saved Clara, his late wife, during childbirth, was a constant burden, and the idea that there might have been another failure, perhaps one he didn't even know about, was unbearable. That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Richard roamed the house, a ghost in his own fortress. He looked at photographs of Clara, his eyes fixed on her smile, searching for a silent answer the images couldn't provide. He recalled the days of the pregnancy, the quiet joy, the anticipation. But the memories were hazy, clouded by the pain of the subsequent loss. The delivery, the delivery. It all blurred into a fog of adrenaline, panic, and grief. The next day, the trip to pick up Sophia from school became a ritual of secret observation. Richard would park his car a little farther away and watch the girls play. He noticed the way Anna moved, her gestures, her laugh. It all mirrored Sophia. It was like seeing his own daughter in a mirror, slightly distorted by life, perhaps, but a mirror nonetheless. And with each passing day, Sophia's conviction grew stronger, more palpable. In the car one day, Sophia turned to him, her eyes wide with a determination unusual for a child her age. "Daddy, the doctor said you were going to have twins, but when we were born, only I came out. She got lost." The words, spoken with the purest innocence, echoed in the car, striking Richard with full force. Twins. The word vibrated in the air, triggering a cascade of memories he had conveniently tucked away in a dark corner of his mind. He remembered conversations with Clara, whispered amidst checkups and ultrasounds. "Two heartbeats, Richard," she had exclaimed once, her eyes shining with joy and a hint of panic. Then, the joy had turned to apprehension. The doctors spoke of complications, risks for one of the babies, difficult decisions. At the time, with the pregnancy advanced and his concern for Clara's health, he had focused only on keeping them safe. The stress was so immense that when the worst happened and Clara was gone, the memory of these details blended with the trauma, overshadowed by overwhelming grief. He had believed that the second child, if she had indeed existed, had been lost during the complications. But Sophia, with her cutting innocence, was bringing it all to the surface. She got lost. The phrase haunted him. That same night, Richard felt an urgency he could no longer ignore. The need to know the truth was like a fire consuming him. He sat in front of his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before he began to type. Clara Caldwell pregnancy medical records. The search led him down a bureaucratic rabbit hole of forms and permissions, but he was determined. He needed answers, and he needed them now. In the following days, Richard plunged into a relentless search for documents. He dug through dusty cardboard boxes in the attic where he kept mementos of Clara. He found old folders with test results, reports, hospital bills. His eyes scanned every line, every word. And there they were, ambiguous references, stray phrases that now took on a new and terrifying meaning. Complications with one of the babies, intensive monitoring of the second fetus, difficult decisions during delivery. He recalled a fragmented conversation with a doctor after Clara's death. Something about having done what was possible to save one of the babies. At the time, Richard, in his overwhelming grief, assumed they were referring to Sophia and the failed attempt to save Clara. Now it all seemed to fit into a much larger picture. The second child. The child Sophia claimed was her sister. The child who was a perfect copy of Sophia. Richard's heart pounded erratically. He needed full access to the records. He needed a complete explanation. The truth, he realized, was hidden somewhere, and he wouldn't rest until he found it, no matter how painful it might be. The image of Clara, once synonymous with pain, now blended with that of Anna, creating a complex mosaic he desperately needed to decipher. The thread connecting the past to the present was there, about to be unraveled. The discovery of fragmented information in Clara's old medical records ignited a flame of determination in Richard. The pain of loss, the guilt of not saving his wife, it all now mingled with the urgency of solving Anna's mystery. He knew the next step was to confront the hospital, demand full access to the files, and uncover the difficult decisions and complications with one of the babies that had been so vaguely mentioned. With a heavy heart and a focused mind, Richard scheduled a meeting with the administration of St. Clair's Hospital, the same place where Sophia had been born and where Clara had died. He prepared a folder with all the documents he had found, highlighting the ambiguous phrases, the dates, the doctors' names. Each time he read those words, the certainty that there was more to Sophia's birth story grew stronger. Arriving at the hospital, Richard was met by a formal and impersonal team. He sat in a cold, sterile room, the smell of antiseptic invading his nostrils and bringing back painful memories. A woman with thin glasses and a serious expression, Dr. Evelyn Reed, head of medical records, and a hospital lawyer, Mr. Almeida, awaited him. Richard presented his case, his voice firm, explaining the resemblance, Sophia's words, the fragmented documents. The response he received, however, was an impenetrable wall. "Mr. Caldwell," Dr. Reed began, her voice monotone, "we understand your concern, but St. Clair's Hospital strictly adheres to patient privacy policies. Furthermore, the events you're describing occurred 7 years ago. Many of those records have been deep archived, and some, due to our retention policy, may have even been disposed of." The lawyer nodded gravely, reinforcing the hospital's position. Moreover, any information regarding a possible second baby would not have been made public without the mother's consent, as per state law. Richard felt frustration welling up inside him. "But my wife is deceased. I am the father. I have a right to know what happened to my children," he argued, his voice taking on a desperate edge. The lawyer, however, remained impassive. "We understand your situation, Mr. Caldwell. However, without a specific court order or more compelling evidence to justify reopening such an old case, our protocols prevent us from releasing additional information. The passage of time, as Dr. Reed rightly pointed out, makes retrieving detailed data extremely difficult." Richard tried to argue, to insist, but it was like hitting a concrete wall. The hospital refused to provide the complete records, citing privacy policies and the passage of time. They would protect themselves, he knew, at all costs. He left with a lump in his throat, his mind seething with anger and helplessness. The first significant obstacle to uncovering the truth had been erected, tall and insurmountable. The hospital's refusal didn't completely discourage him, but it left him at a temporary dead end. Meanwhile, Anna's presence in Sophia's life, and consequently in his, became more constant. Sophia talked incessantly about her friend, their games, their shared secrets. Richard, however, felt barred from approaching Anna directly. He was not a relative. He had no legal connection. Approaching a vulnerable child, especially with his appearance as a wealthy man, could raise suspicion, frighten her, and even harm her. He feared being seen as a predator or someone with ulterior motives. The second obstacle had emerged: how to get closer to the girl, how to protect her without causing alarm and creating more problems for her. That week, Richard began to watch Anna from a distance, outside the school. He saw her saying goodbye to Sophia, gratitude in her eyes for a simple conversation. He saw the girl walk through less privileged streets, her steps light but determined. He felt a deep ache, imagining the hardships she faced, so different from Sophia's protected life. The image of Clara once again materialized in his mind, her eyes full of sadness. He had promised to protect them, both of them, and now he felt he was failing to keep that promise, trapped in a web of bureaucracy and fear. Time was passing, and with each day the truth remained hidden. The urgency in his heart grew, driven by an uncontrollable need to understand the inexplicable and finally to do justice to his wife's memory, and the life he felt had been stolen. The powerlessness in the face of the hospital's refusal and the impossibility of approaching Anna without raising suspicion ate away at Richard. He felt trapped in an invisible web, tightly woven by bureaucracy and social norms. The image of the two girls, so alike and yet so different in their lives, hammered in his mind, mixing with the latent pain of losing Clara. He couldn't just ignore the situation. The seed of doubt had already grown into a sprawling tree. That week, Richard decided to act, but with the discretion the situation demanded. He hired a private investigator, a quiet and experienced man named Carlos, known for his ethics and skill in handling delicate cases. Richard explained the situation in general terms, omitting the twin hypothesis, but stressing the need to find out about Anna's family, where she lived and her situation. "I need information, Carlos, but without alarming anyone, without scaring the girl. Discretion is paramount." Richard emphasized, his eyes fixed on the investigators. Carlos, a man of few words, but with an attentive gaze, accepted the challenge. In the following days, Richard received concise but increasingly alarming reports. The first piece of information was about Anna's whereabouts. She lived in a rough neighborhood on the other side of town, a brutal contrast to Richard's mansion and the upscale area where Sophia was growing up. Richard's heart sank at the news. The physical distance between their lives was an abyss. The next report brought more details. Anna was in the care of an elderly woman named Maria, who was not her biological relative. Maria was a matriarchal figure in the community, known for her big heart and for taking in children in need. The girl, despite her young age, contributed to the household income by doing odd jobs in the community, like helping at street markets or running errands. And, occasionally, as Carlos discovered with a touch of sadness in his voice, she resorted to petty theft to get food. The last part of the report hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Anna, a child he now believed to be his daughter, was in a situation of extreme vulnerability, forced to resort to such measures to survive. The guilt, already a constant companion, deepened. As Carlos continued his investigation, Richard felt the urgency grow. He watched Sophia sleep, her breath calm, her long lashes resting on her rosy cheeks. Then he imagined Anna, perhaps on a thin mattress, her stomach rumbling, her dreams interrupted by harsh reality. He had to do something, but every step felt like a minefield. One day, Carlos called, his voice graver than usual. "Mr. Caldwell, I have important information. I managed to get a photo of Anna as a baby. It was difficult, but Maria had it saved. And there's a detail. Well, the girl has a peculiar birthmark on the inside of her left arm near the elbow. It's small, shaped like a star." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Sophia, he knew. He remembered that birthmark on Sophia, identical, small and discreet, which Clara used to joke was her daughter's lucky star. Only he and Clara knew about that mark. It was something intimate, a family secret. He asked Carlos to send the photo. Upon receiving it, Richard saw the small reddish mark on the baby's skin. There was no more doubt. The identical birthmark, such a particular, personal detail, could not be a mere coincidence. It was the physical, irrefutable confirmation that the biological connection between Anna and Sophia was real. His hands trembled as he held his phone, the image of the little star on baby Anna's skin merging with the image of Sophia's star. She was his daughter, his second daughter, the child he thought he had lost. The revelation hit him with the force of a tsunami, dismantling all his defenses. On the same day, Carlos sent a new report, this time with even more surprising information. His late wife, Clara, had made secret contact with a charity organization before she passed away, and most shockingly, she had left specific instructions about caring for another child. Instructions Richard never knew existed. The idea that Clara had foreseen something, that she had acted behind his back to protect one of her daughters, filled Richard with an overwhelming mix of admiration, guilt, and a deep sense of injustice. Clara, in her final days, already knew, and she had acted. But why was he never told? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a painful picture of secrets and sacrifices. He was on the brink of a truth that would change his life forever, but the path to it would still be long and tortuous, and he felt that the shadows of the past still held many secrets. The discovery of the birthmark and the revelation of Clara's secret instructions to the charity struck Richard like lightning, illuminating the darkest corners of his grief and memories. The confirmation that Anna was, in fact, his biological daughter, Sophia's twin sister, crashed down on him with overwhelming force. Every piece of the puzzle, once so scattered, now fit together in a terrible and perfect way. The guilt of not saving Clara mixed with the pain of having lived 7 years without knowing his other daughter, without knowing of Anna's existence. During the third week after the encounter at the market, Richard's life turned into a relentless quest for the truth. He continued to employ Carlos, the investigator, who became his eyes and ears in Anna's world. While Sophia's daily life continued its happy and protected course, Richard's secret world expanded into the dusty streets of the rough neighborhood where his other daughter fought to survive. However, his presence, even if discreet, did not go unnoticed for long. Carlos reported that people connected to Anna had become suspicious of Richard's interest in her. Some of the adults who exploited the girl for petty theft, who benefited from her vulnerability, began to see the businessman as a threat to their business. They were the parasites that fed on the fragility of others, and the prospect of a rescue for Anna was a danger to their interests. The threats began subtly, whispers around the school, watchful eyes on the paths Anna used to take. Then, the words became more direct, full of intimidation. "It's better if this girl disappears from that man's sight," they said. "He's not from around here. He looks like trouble." The pressure on Maria and on Anna herself intensified. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. His attempt at discretion was failing, and the imminent danger was approaching like a dark cloud. He had underestimated the cruelty of those who took advantage of the girl. The third obstacle for Richard manifested itself in a painful way. Anna was forced to hide from him. The threats she received were so concrete that Maria, in her wisdom and concern, instructed the girl to avoid Richard at all costs. She stopped coming to school for a few days, and when she did, she was escorted by suspicious adults, their small, wary eyes watching Richard from afar. Richard's heart ached. His daughter, whom he had barely rediscovered, was being pushed away from him, forced to live in fear because of his own search. Anna's face, with the same sweetness as Sophia's but marked by the harshness of life, haunted his dreams. As if that weren't enough, a new and unexpected obstacle arose, further complicating the situation. Local authorities, alerted by anonymous tips, likely orchestrated by the same people exploiting Anna, began to question Richard's motives for approaching a vulnerable child. Police officers showed up at his company, at Sophia's school, asking indirect questions with a clear insinuation that he could be a predator. The scandal could destroy his reputation, harm Sophia, and worst of all, push Anna away for good. He was a man of means, but at that moment, money seemed useless against bureaucracy and human malice. The fourth obstacle had materialized, and Richard felt trapped, his hands tied by unjust accusations. Amidst this chaos, an unexpected and touching subplot unfolded. Despite attempts to keep them apart, the friendship between Sophia and Anna continued to blossom in secret. They would meet at different times at school, in hidden corners of the playground, or exchange notes and drawings. The connection between them was undeniable, an intuitive harmony that transcended their physical resemblance and the harsh reality that separated them. Richard watched from a distance the small gestures of affection, the knowing glances, the stifled laughter. It was as if, by a primal instinct, the two souls recognized each other, a blood bond stronger than any barrier imposed by fate or malice. This friendship, which seemed like a spark of hope in the darkness, was what kept Richard going, fueling his determination to fight for his daughters, for his family. Time was running out, and he knew he had to act quickly and cunningly before Anna was lost forever, and before his own reputation was irreparably stained. The fourth week brought a wave of revelations and a growing tension that threatened to engulf Richard. The obstacles were multiplying, the veiled threats to Anna, the police's insinuations about his motives, and the frustration of not getting the truth from the hospital. All of this, however, seemed like distant noise in the face of the certainty that now resided in his heart. The birthmark, Sophia's intuition, the fragmented memories of Clara, everything pointed to the same disturbing truth. But the real confirmation, the irrefutable proof, came in a sealed envelope. Weeks earlier, with Carlos's help, Richard had acted with a cunning he didn't even know he possessed. Seizing a moment when Anna was playing in the schoolyard, he had discreetly obtained a sample of her hair fallen on the ground. Simultaneously, he collected genetic material from Sophia and himself. The process was a torment of anxiety and guilt, but the need to know the truth was stronger. He had sent the samples to a trusted forensic lab in absolute secrecy, with the promise of quick results. The wait was agonizing, each day an eternity, each phone ring a jump in his heart. When the envelope finally arrived, the official letterhead of the lab seemed to dance before his eyes. His hands trembled as he tore the seal, and the paper in his hands felt like it weighed a ton. With every line his eyes scanned, reality imposed itself with brutal and painful clarity. The words were unequivocal. 99.9% genetic compatibility between samples A, Richard Caldwell, B, Sophia Caldwell, and C, Anna. Anna was, indeed, his biological daughter. She was Sophia's twin sister, the child he thought he had lost during the complicated hours of Clara's delivery. A muffled cry escaped his throat, a mixture of relief, joy, and excruciating pain. The tears, long held back, streamed down his face. She was his daughter, and he had lived 7 years without knowing, without being able to protect her, while she grew up in a world of deprivation. The image of Clara came to mind, her smile, her strength. Did she know? Had she kept such a colossal secret all that time? Guilt hit him like a tidal wave. How could he have been so blind, so absorbed in his own grief that he didn't see the signs, didn't fight harder to understand what had happened at the hospital? The fear of having failed, of having lost precious time, ate at his soul. From that moment on, Richard's life changed course. He looked at Sophia with renewed love, but also with the pain of knowing that the other half of his little star was missing. Sophia, in her innocence, continued to speak of Anna as her secret sister, and Richard now understood that there was nothing secret about their connection. It was a blood tie, an unbreakable bond. But the confirmation of paternity, instead of bringing calm, only intensified the challenges. The men who exploited Anna, sensing they were about to lose her, became more aggressive. Carlos reported that they were watching Richard closely and had begun to follow his movements, issuing veiled threats through intermediaries in Anna's community. If this rich guy doesn't stop snooping, bad things could happen to the girl, was the message that reached Richard's ears. He felt the weight of responsibility crushing him. At any moment, Anna could be used as a pawn in a cruel game. At the same time, the pressure from the authorities did not let up. An officer from Child Protective Services paid a formal visit to his company, with more pointed questions about his interest in Anna. Richard maintained his composure, reaffirming his intention to help the girl, but without revealing the biological connection, as he knew it would be a shock for the bureaucracy to process and could lead to even more complications. He needed a solid strategy, a legal plan to bring Anna home, but every door he tried to open seemed to be locked. Amidst this turmoil, the friendship between Sophia and Anna was a ray of sunshine. Despite Anna's difficulties in attending school, they managed to meet secretly in a small nearby public park or at staggered dismissal times. Richard, watching them from afar, saw the magic happen. The girls would hug, talk for hours, their gestures and laughs strikingly identical. The intuitive connection between them was a living testament to the truth that life had tried to steal. Seeing his daughters together, even for fleeting, secret moments, gave Richard the strength to continue. He knew that fate had united them, and he would not rest until they were finally safe, together, as they always should have been. However, a shadow lingered in his mind. Why hadn't Clara told him? What exactly happened at the hospital? He knew the next step was to investigate his wife's past, not just his own. for he felt that the complete and overwhelming truth was still hidden in the folds of time. The DNA confirmation, which should have brought relief, instead plunged Richard into an even deeper abyss of questions and pain. The certainty of Anna's paternity mixed with the anguish of knowing that his wife, Clara, had kept such a monumental secret. Why hadn't she told him? What stopped her from revealing they had 2 daughters? The memory of Clara, once a balm to his soul, now became a painful enigma. He needed to unravel the last days of her life, her last actions, her last conversations. With Carlos's help, Richard began to reconstruct the final months of Clara's pregnancy and the moments before and after the delivery. Carlos, with his experience, knew that the key to the truth often lay in the most insignificant details. They revisited the names of the doctors and nurses who attended to Clara, the ultrasound reports, the footnotes in the hospital charts. The goal was to find any clue, any hint that Clara knew both babies had survived. It was during this meticulous search that the first major twist manifested itself shockingly. Carlos found a former nursing assistant who had worked at St. Clair's Hospital at the time of Clara's delivery. A retired and embittered man named Joseph, who now lived in a small town upstate. Joseph, initially reluctant to talk, eventually gave in to Carlos's persistence and the promise of anonymity. His words, secretly recorded by Carlos, were like a punch to Richard's gut. Joseph confirmed Richard's darkest suspicions. Clara knew that both babies had survived. He recounted that during the emergency delivery, there were a series of severe complications. The hospital was overcrowded, with a shortage of beds and staff. Amidst the chaos, and with Clara's health severely compromised, the doctors had to make difficult decisions, as the records had hinted. One of the babies, Anna, was born with respiratory problems and needed immediate intensive care, being transferred to a separate wing without Richard's knowledge, as he was focused on Clara and Sophia. What followed, according to Joseph, was a medical and legal conspiracy to cover up errors and mismanagement at the hospital. To avoid a scandal and the enormous costs of treating a second child who, in their view, would be a burden on the system, and perhaps even on the father who had just lost his wife and was in shock, Anna was officially declared lost to the system. They registered her as an abandoned child, handing her over to a charity that, unaware of the scheme, placed her in community care. The family who took her in, Maria, was part of a foster program. The goal was simple: to avoid the hospital's legal and financial liability. Clara's name was used, and she, on her deathbed, was coerced into signing documents attesting to the voluntary relinquishment of one of the children, all under the promise that the baby would be safe and cared for. Richard listened to Joseph's audio, the ex-nurse's words echoing in his mind like a nightmare. Clara knew. She had fought, even on the verge of death, to ensure Anna had a chance. The guilt he felt for having judged her, for having doubted her love, was overwhelming. He had promised to protect them, and Clara, even weakened, had done the same. The image of his wife, once shrouded in grief and mystery, now revealed itself as that of a heroine, a woman who, in her last breaths, had tried to right a monstrous wrong. The revelation of the medical conspiracy filled him with a cold fury. The hospital, to which he had entrusted his family's lives, had taken advantage of his pain and Clara's vulnerability to commit a terrible injustice. The medical errors and difficult decisions now had a face, the face of corruption and inhumanity. The emotional impact of the discovery was devastating. Richard felt Clara's memory being restored in his mind, but at a very high cost. He had lost 7 years of his daughter's life, and Clara had died carrying the weight of a secret, of a forced separation. The anger at the injustice, the pain of the loss, the admiration for Clara's strength, it all swirled into a vortex of emotions. He looked at his wife's photos, his eyes now filled with a new kind of tears, tears of gratitude for her fight, and tears of promise. He would not rest until Anna was safe in his arms, and until the truth came out, bringing justice to Clara's memory and the life that had been stolen from his daughters. The game, he knew, had just begun, and he was ready to fight. Anger and pain mingled in Richard's soul, fueling an unshakable determination. The revelation of the medical conspiracy, Clara's silent sacrifice, it all drove him to act. He could no longer afford discretion. The time for quiet investigation was over. Now it was time for an open battle to rescue his daughter and honor his wife's memory. During the 5th week, Richard, armed with Joseph's recordings and the DNA results, tried to legally approach Anna. He sought out the best lawyers, those who could take on the power of a renowned hospital. The strategy was clear: expose the conspiracy, prove paternity, and fight for custody of Anna. However, the same people who benefited from the girl's vulnerable situation reacted with even greater ferocity. Carlos, the investigator, reported that Anna's exploiters were on high alert. Richard's movements, the lawyers' visits, Carlos's presence, it all indicated that their business was under threat. The threats became explicit and brutal. Anonymous messages arrived on Richard's phone, with photos of Anna alone, in vulnerable locations, accompanied by terrifying phrases. "Be careful what you're looking for, rich boy. This girl is ours. If you keep interfering, she could get hurt. Badly." On one occasion, a tire on Richard's car was slashed, and a scribbled note was left on the windshield: "You're not taking our source of income." Richard felt his blood run cold. He was in an impossible position. Trying to save Anna openly put her in immediate danger. Backing down meant abandoning her to the mercy of those criminals. The dilemma was excruciating. Protecting Anna from immediate reprisals meant not fighting for her legally, but fighting legally meant exposing her to even greater danger. The weight of that choice crushed his chest. He couldn't let Anna suffer any more because of him. While Richard grappled with these new and terrible obstacles, Carlos made another devastating discovery. Delving deeper into Clara's life, the investigator had found documents hidden in a secret compartment in his wife's old desk, a compartment Richard had never noticed, camouflaged among other objects. Inside, there was a handwritten letter from Clara, dated just days before her death, and along with the letter, bank statements and transfer receipts. The letter was an emotional confession and a testament of love and struggle. Clara described the medical conspiracy, the pressure to give up Anna, the promise that the girl would be cared for. She had signed the documents under duress, but had never accepted the separation of her daughters. In her final days, aware of her own fragility, Clara had secretly organized substantial financial resources to care for their second daughter, Anna. She had made transfers to a specific account intended to be managed by the charity, with clear instructions for its exclusive use for Anna's well-being. However, the bank statements and transfer receipts revealed the cruel truth. These funds, intended for Anna, had been diverted. The transfer dates were clear, the amounts significant. But the charity's records, which Richard and Carlos had accessed with a partial court order, showed no entry of these funds for Anna's care. Someone, part of that corrupt network that had separated the twins, had stolen the money. The funds that Clara, with her last ounce of strength, had designated to secure her daughter's future, were stolen by unscrupulous people. Richard felt a wave of dizziness. It wasn't just the hospital that had failed, but a network of corrupt individuals who fed on others. Misfortune, the pain of betrayal, the cruelty of that act was almost unbearable. The memory of Clara, which he had just redeemed, was now stained by this new layer of injustice. His wife had fought to the end, and even after her death, her intentions had been disrespected, her resources diverted. The revelation was the third and most impactful major twist. Richard felt the cold anger turn into a burning fury. He wasn't just fighting for his daughters, but also for Clara, for her honor, For her last wish, the battle would be more complex than he had imagined, involving not only the hospital and Anna's exploiters, but also a network of corruption that had profited from his family's tragedy. He knew the fight would be hard, but the image of Clara, the strength in her eyes, and the unconditional love for her two daughters fueled his soul. He was ready to go to the end, to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The line between right and wrong, between justice and impunity, was thin, and he was about to cross it. Richard's rage and indignation were a fire consuming him from within. The revelations about the conspiracy, Clara's sacrifice, and the diverted funds ignited in him an unbreakable determination. He was no longer just a father fighting for his daughters. He was a man on a mission for justice, driven by an overwhelming love and the memory of a heroic wife. The fifth week ended with the sense that the battle was just beginning, but Richard felt stronger, more focused than ever. He knew he had to act strategically, protecting Anna while preparing the legal offensive. With Carlos's help, he assembled a discreet security team to monitor Anna from a distance, ensuring any threat would be intercepted. In parallel, his lawyers, armed with all the evidence, the DNA, Joseph's recording, Clara's letter, the diverted bank statements, began to map out the legal strategy to confront the hospital and those involved in the fund diversion. The war would be fought on multiple fronts. However, the complexity of the situation deepened. Anna's exploiters, realizing Richard was getting too close, decided to raise the stakes. They not only threatened Anna, but also began to weave a web to ensnare Sophia. Disturbing messages were left in the mailbox of his mansion, with photos of Sophia's school, insinuating that both flowers in your garden could wilt. Richard's terror intensified. It was no longer just one daughter at risk, but both. The nightmare of every parent, the fear of losing their children, was materializing in a hideous way. The secret friendship between Sophia and Anna, once a source of hope, now became a point of vulnerability. Richard feared their proximity could be used against them. He tried to talk to Sophia about the dangers of meeting Anna in public places, but the child's innocence couldn't grasp the scale of the threat. "But Daddy, she's my sister. I can feel it," Sophia insisted, and Richard felt a pang of pain in his chest, knowing that this truth was the very cause of all the danger. As external pressures mounted, Richard's internal conflict also reached its peak. The guilt of not protecting Clara, of not investigating more thoroughly in the past, ate away at him. He found himself reliving the moments of his wife's death, questioning every decision, every word. The fragility of his own emotional state became a burden, and he knew he had to be strong, not just for himself, but for his daughters. His sessions with his therapist, which had dwindled after the initial grief, were urgently resumed. As he needed support to navigate this sea of pain and danger, the emotional climax was fast approaching. On a rainy afternoon, while Richard was in a meeting with his lawyers, his phone rang. It was a call from Carlos. The investigator's voice altered, filled with panic. "Mr. Caldwell, the girls! They've been taken!" The words cut through the air like knives. Richard felt his heart stop. Both of them, both of his daughters, taken. The pain and fear were so intense he nearly collapsed. Carlos, his voice choked, managed to explain. "Sophia was taken from outside the school, used as bait. The kidnappers knew you would protect her. And Anna was forced into a car by other men in her neighborhood. They've separated them." Richard felt his world crumble, his daughters, his stars, in the hands of criminals, separated, vulnerable. The terror of losing them both, the nightmare of every parent, had become reality. The line went dead for a moment. Richard, his mind on fire, heard Carlos's voice again. "They called your office. They have a message. They said if you try the police or anything, one of them gets hurt, and that you have to choose which daughter to save first. One is bait, the other will disappear." The world stopped for Richard. Choose. Which daughter to save first? The dilemma was cruel, inhuman. It was a nightmare incarnate. The impossible decision he never imagined he would have to face. The man who had promised to protect his daughters was now at a deadly crossroads where every choice was a loss, every step an abyss. He felt the darkness closing in, but amidst the terror, a small flame of hope still flickered, fueled by the unconditional love he felt for both his daughters and by the memory of Clara, who had fought to the very end. He had to be as strong as she was. The phone slipped from Richard's hand, clattering to the floor with a hollow sound that echoed in the silent room. Carlos's pale face, the words, "taken," "choose," "bait," spun in his mind like a macabre carousel. The world, once so orderly and predictable, had collapsed. His two daughters, two halves of the same heart, were in the hands of monsters. The terror of losing them both, of failing again as he had failed Clara, was a poison spreading through his veins. He sank to his knees, his body trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming down his face. Images of Sophia, her joyful laugh, her tight hug. Images of Anna, her shyness, her eyes full of gratitude. How could he choose? What kind of father was he to have to decide which of his children he would save? The dilemma was inhuman, an unimaginable torture. He closed his eyes, searching for strength somewhere deep in his soul, in the memory of Clara, who had fought so bravely in her final days. "Richard, get up!" Carlos's firm voice snapped him out of his stupor. The investigator helped him to his feet, his eyes conveying a cold, calculated urgency. "We don't have time for this. They want you to choose. But they also want you to be irrational. We need to think. What are their demands?" Richard forced his mind to focus, to push away the paralyzing panic. He clung to logic, to the years of training in the business world, where quick, calculated decisions were the key to survival. The message that had arrived at his company was clear. The documents about the hospital and the diverted money must be incinerated. No legal action, no reports, and you will disappear from the girl Anna's life forever. If not, the consequences for your daughters will be irreversible. And the cruelest part, choose which of your daughters you want to see again. The other will not be found. Richard felt a knot in his throat. It was a cruel blackmail, a perverse game of power and fear. They wanted him to give up justice for Clara and Anna herself, to save Sophia. But he knew that giving in didn't guarantee the safety of either of them. They were criminals, and their word was worthless. As Richard tried to process the barbarity of the demands, a spark of hope, almost imperceptible, shone through the darkness. The intuitive connection between the twins. He remembered Sophia's stories, the secret meetings, the way they seemed to understand each other without words. Was it possible that, even separated, this bond could be the key? He looked at Carlos, his eyes fixed and determined. "They underestimate my daughters, Carlos. They underestimate the connection between them, and they underestimate my determination. I will not choose one over the other. I will save them both." Richard felt an unexpected strength surge within him. The guilt, the fear, it all transformed into a cold, calculated anger. With Carlos's help, Richard began to draw up a plan. He knew that time was short. The police, brought in by his lawyers, were working in the background, but discretion was crucial to avoid alarming the kidnappers. Richard needed a way to communicate with his daughters, to alert them, to give them a chance to help each other. He remembered a small pendant he had given Sophia, a metal locket with a tiny tracking device inside, a precautionary gift he had given her after Clara's death, driven by his protective paranoia. Carlos checked the signal. It was active, weak, but active. Sophia was in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place the thugs used to hold hostages. Anna's location, however, was unknown. The signal from her cell phone, if she even had one, couldn't be traced. Richard's anguish grew. He had one location, but not both. How could he reach Anna? He thought of the notes Sophia and Anna exchanged at school, the drawings, the little things that connected them. He needed a link, a form of secret communication. Richard decided to play along with the bait. He called the number the kidnappers had provided, his voice heavy with a pain he didn't have to feign. "I accept your conditions. I want to see Sophia, and I want proof that Anna is okay. After that, I'll do what you want." The voice on the other end was cold and calculating. "Good choice, rich man. You'll get your daughter back, but don't forget the price. And don't try anything funny. We're watching." Richard's plan began to unfold. He knew he was putting himself in danger, but the love for his daughters was the only force driving him. He had to act with intelligence and courage, knowing that Sophia and Anna's fate was in his hands. This was the point of no return, the moment he had to face his deepest demons and fight for everything he loved. And the first victory, he knew, would be just the beginning of a long and painful journey toward justice and the reunification of his family. He was ready for whatever came next, driven by a love that transcended all fear. Richard's decision not to yield to blackmail and to use the connection between his daughters as a secret weapon marked the beginning of a desperate race against time. The plan was risky, but the alternative, choosing which daughter to save, was unthinkable. With Sophia's location confirmed by the tracker and the certainty that Anna was somewhere else, he felt a mix of hope and chilling terror. Richard and Carlos, with discreet help from the police who would act as tactical support, prepared for the raid on the warehouse where Sophia was being held. The objective was clear: rescue Sophia and through her, find Anna. Richard knew he would have to act as a negotiator, stalling the thugs for as long as possible to give the police time to surround the building. He dressed simply, trying to appear less threatening, but with a concealed handgun he hoped he wouldn't have to use. Upon arriving at the warehouse, a dark and derelict place on the city's edge, Richard was met by two burly men with scarred faces and empty eyes. They searched him roughly, confiscating his phone and anything that could be a weapon. "Where is my daughter?" Richard asked, his voice low but firm. One of the men pointed to a dark corner. There was Sophia, sitting on the filthy floor, her eyes wide with fear, but incredibly with a flicker of recognition when she saw him. Richard approached, his heart in pieces at the sight of his daughter's terrified face. "Daddy!" she whispered, running to hug him. The embrace was a balm in the midst of chaos. As he held her, he whispered in her ear, his voice so low only she could hear, "Sophia, Anna is in danger too. You have to be strong. There's a way to find her." Richard knew the twin intuition was a mystery, but he was counting on it. The thugs demanded the documents and evidence against the hospital. Richard, maintaining his composure, feigned hesitation. "They're in my safe. It will take some time to get them, but first I want to be sure Anna is okay." The demand was a bluff, but it bought time for the police to get into position. The impatient thugs made a call, and Richard heard a familiar but trembling voice on the other end. It was Anna. "Anna, are you okay?" Richard asked, trying to sound calm, sending a silent message of strength. "Yes, mister. I can feel Sophia," Anna's voice replied, with a clarity that startled the kidnappers. Sophia, hearing her sister's voice, lifted her head, her eyes now filled with a new determination. "Daddy, I feel like she's near the water, a place that smells like fish and metal." Sophia's words were a bolt of lightning. Carlos, who was monitoring the call, heard the description and immediately alerted the search team, directing them to the port area, a district known for its warehouses and distinct odors. The twins' intuitive connection had worked. As the thugs grew agitated with the delays and Richard's questions, the police stormed the warehouse. The confrontation was swift and brutal, but Richard, holding Sophia, shielded her with his own body. The criminals were subdued and Sophia was finally safe in his arms. However, the fight was not over. The legal battle against the hospital and the corrupt network that had separated the twins and diverted Clara's funds was exhausting. Testimonies, evidence, documents. Richard spent a fortune, both financially and emotionally. He faced the trauma of reliving Clara's death at every hearing, of exposing his wife's fragility, but he did it for her, for Anna, for Sophia. Justice finally began to be served. The ex-nurse Joseph testified, and other hospital staff, under threat of criminal charges, confirmed the conspiracy. The truth about the medical errors, the cover-up, and the separation of the twins came to light, shocking everyone. The hospital was held liable and ordered to pay a massive settlement, in addition to being forced to overhaul its protocols. Its reputation was irreparably tarnished, and several doctors and administrators were fired or imprisoned. In parallel, the criminal network that had kidnapped the girls and stolen Clara's funds was also dismantled. The thugs were arrested, and the diverted assets, including the funds Clara had left for Anna, were recovered. The final victory, though costly, brought not only the reunion of the twin sisters, but also justice for his late wife. Clara's last wish, that both her daughters be raised together, was finally honored. The image of Anna being rescued from the warehouse at the port, running into the arms of Richard and Sophia, was the most moving moment of his life. The three of them embraced, a knot of relief and love, tears mixing with laughter. Richard had learned that the greatest treasure was not in business, but in the family one has the courage to fight to keep together. The journey had been long and painful, but they were together at last, a family unit that should never have been broken. The future, he knew, would be one of healing and rebuilding, but now, with his two daughters in his arms, he was ready for any challenge. 6 weeks had passed since that chance encounter in the market, a period that, for Richard, felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. The mansion, once a silent sanctuary filled only by Sophia's presence, now vibrated with the energy of two little girls. Anna, once shy and marked by the harshness of life, blossomed with each passing day, her laughter mingling with Sophia's, filling every corner of the house with a long, silenced melody. Anna's adjustment to her new life was not without its challenges. The scars of the past ran deep, and Richard, in his new mission as a father of two, dedicated himself to healing them with love and patience. Therapy sessions, toys, new clothes, and above all, the constant loving presence of Sophia helped Anna to flourish. She learned to trust, to dream, to simply be a child. The school, now attended by both sisters, was a new world of discovery and learning. Justice for Clara, his late wife, was a balm for Richard's heart. The exposure of the medical corruption, the punishment of those responsible, the acknowledgement of Clara's sacrifice, it all brought a sense of closure. He visited Clara's grave with Sophia and Anna, told them about their mother's bravery, about her unconditional love that had fought to keep them together. The girls laid flowers, and Richard felt Clara's presence, a relief and a peace he hadn't felt since the day she passed. Richard's transformation was profound. The man once consumed by guilt and the fear of loss had become a pillar of strength and compassion. His protection, once excessive and suffocating, had matured into a balanced and nurturing love. He learned that life, despite its tragedies, always offers a second chance, an opportunity to start over, to rebuild. He was still a successful entrepreneur, but the priority of his life had radically changed. The time with his daughters, the laughter, the hugs, the simple moments of everyday life were now his greatest treasure. Anna and Sophia, the two stars that should never have been separated, were living proof that love, family, and justice always prevail. They were identical on the outside, but their experiences had shaped them differently, creating a unique complementarity. Sophia, with her vibrant energy and insatiable curiosity, guided Anna through the world of privilege she now enjoyed. Anna, with her resilience and sensitivity, taught Sophia the value of simplicity, gratitude, and inner strength. The nights in the mansion were filled with bedtime stories, with Richard reading to them both, his arms wrapped around them in a warm embrace. He told them about Clara's heroism, about the strength she had in her final days, and how her love had been the invisible thread that kept them connected. Sophia and Anna, nestled in their soft pajamas, listened intently, their eyes shining with the light of a family finally whole. The story's end was not one of material wealth, but of a richness of spirit, of a love that had overcome tragedy, corruption, and human malice. Richard, the widower who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, was now a complete, healed father, overflowing with gratitude. He had fought for his daughters, for his memory, for justice, and he had won. That unexpected meeting in the market, which began with a soft whimper and a carton of milk, had turned into a miracle, a new beginning for a family that life had tried to break. With his two daughters in his arms, looking toward the future with hope and love, Richard knew that Clara would be proud. He had honored her memory, and the greatest gift he could give was the happiness of his girls, united as they always should have been. The journey was long and arduous, but love, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth had triumphed. The family was now a safe harbor, a sanctuary of love and forgiveness. And in every smile from Sophia and Anna, Richard saw the reflection of Clara's eternal love, a promise that even after the storm, the